The wind came off Lake Michigan sharp enough to sting, pushing through the narrow streets of Chicago's near north side with the kind of cold that made your bones ache. February always felt like punishment here, but Marcus Hayes barely noticed anymore. He'd lived in this city his entire 43 years, worked as a paramedic for the last 18, and the cold was just another thing that existed, like traffic or the L train rattling overhead. What he did notice was the dog. She sat perfectly still at the corner of North Avenue and Sedgwick, a black and white border collie with eyes so focused they looked almost human. Marcus had seen her there 3 mornings in a row now, always in the same spot, always at exactly 6:47 a.m. when he walked to the Red Line station for his shift at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The first morning, he'd assumed she was waiting for her owner outside one of the coffee shops. The second morning, he'd started to worry. This morning, the third morning, he stopped. "Hey, girl," Marcus said, crouching down a few feet away. He'd learned long ago not to approach strange dogs too quickly. "Where's your person?" The dog's ears pricked forward, but she didn't move. She wore a collar, navy blue, expensive looking, but no leash. Her coat was clean, well maintained. This wasn't a stray, or at least hadn't been one for long. Marcus pulled out his phone and checked the time. He had 9 minutes before he'd be late. He looked at the dog again, at the way she sat with such purpose, such stillness, like she was waiting for something specific. If you're enjoying this story, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Now let's continue. Marcus stood up, intending to call animal care and control when the dog did something unexpected. She stood, walked 3 steps toward him, then turned and looked back over her shoulder. The gesture was so deliberate, so clearly communicative, that Marcus felt his paramedic instincts kick in. In his line of work, you learned to read signs others missed. You learned that sometimes the smallest gesture carried the biggest meaning. "You want me to follow you?" The dog took 2 more steps, stopped, looked back again. Marcus checked his phone once more, then made a decision that would change everything. He followed. The border collie moved with purpose through the morning crowds, staying close enough that Marcus could keep her in sight, but far enough ahead that she was clearly leading. They turned down Sedgwick toward Old Town, past brownstones with their lights just beginning to flicker on, past a man scraping ice off his windshield, past a woman in scrubs who gave Marcus a curious look as he hurried after a dog through the grey dawn. 3 blocks in, Marcus started to question himself. He was going to be late for work. He was following a dog through Chicago based on nothing but a feeling. But then the dog stopped in front of a 3-story brick building with a green door, turned to look at him once more, and began to bark. Not the aggressive bark of a territorial animal or the excited bark of a dog at play. This was different, urgent, desperate, the kind of sound that raised the hair on the back of Marcus's neck. He approached the building. The front door was locked, but through the small window he could see a narrow hallway, stairs leading up. The dog barked again, scratching at the door with her front paws. Marcus tried the building's intercom, pressing buttons at random. No answer. He pulled out his phone to call 911, then hesitated. Call them and say what? A dog wanted him to go inside a building. But that paramedic instinct was screaming now, the same instinct that had saved lives before. The instinct that knew when something was wrong even before the evidence presented itself. He tried the door handle again, and this time he put his shoulder into it. The frame was old, the lock loose. On the 3rd try, it gave way. The dog shot past him up the stairs, her nails clicking on worn hardwood. Marcus followed, taking the steps 2 at a time. 1st floor, 2nd floor. The dog didn't stop until she reached the 3rd floor, a single door at the end of a dim hallway. She scratched at it, whining now, high and desperate. Marcus knocked. Hello? Chicago Fire Department! It was a lie, but it got people to open doors. No response. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, calling out as he entered. Hello, is anyone here? I'm a paramedic. The apartment was small, neat, filled with morning light from east-facing windows. A living room with a couch and television, a kitchen with breakfast dishes still in the sink, and slumped against the bathroom door frame, a woman in her 70s, unconscious, her skin gray, her lips blue. Marcus was moving before his conscious mind caught up, his training taking over. He checked her pulse, thready, irregular, checked her pupils, unresponsive. Her breathing was shallow, labored. He pulled out his phone, called 911, gave the address, gave the details in the clipped, efficient language of medical emergency. Unresponsive female, approximately 70 years old, possible cardiac event or stroke. Pulse weak and irregular. Respirations shallow. I'm beginning CPR. He tilted her head back, checked her airway, began compressions. The dog sat 3 feet away, watching with those intense eyes, no longer barking. Just watching. Waiting. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. Marcus heard the sirens, heard boots on the stairs, then his co-workers were there, Jen and Rodriguez from Engine 51, taking over, loading the woman onto a stretcher, starting an IV, attaching monitors. Marcus stepped back, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, and realized he'd never asked the most important question. The dog, he said. That border collie. She's the one who brought me here. Jen looked up from the monitor. What? The dog found me 3 blocks away and led me here. I don't know how she knew, but she knew. Rodriguez glanced around the apartment. Where is she? Marcus turned. The dog was sitting by the couch now next to a small table with a framed photograph. Marcus walked over and picked it up. The woman from the floor, younger, smiling, with the border collie puppy in her arms. Behind them, a sign. Welcome home, Maggie. Her name's Maggie, Marcus said quietly. They loaded the woman, her ID said Eleanor Vasquez, into the ambulance. Marcus stayed behind with Maggie, calling animal care and control, explaining the situation. They'd send someone within the hour. He sat on Eleanor's couch, and Maggie came to sit beside him, resting her head on his knee. You saved her life, Marcus told the dog. You know that? You saved her life. While Maggie's tail wagged once, slowly, but her eyes stayed worried. Marcus called into work, explained why he was late. His supervisor, thankfully, understood. Then he sat there with Maggie, stroking her soft head, looking around Eleanor's apartment. It was the home of someone who lived alone, but not lonely. Books on the shelves, plants on the windowsill, photographs of families scattered throughout. A daughter in graduation robes. A son in military uniform. Eleanor and her late husband on a beach somewhere warm. And in every recent photo, Maggie. When the animal care and control officer arrived, a young woman named Keisha with kind eyes, Marcus explained everything. She listened, made notes, took photos of Maggie's collar for identification records. We'll keep her at the shelter until Mrs. Vasquez recovers, Keisha said, or until family can claim her. Marcus watched them load Maggie into the van. The dog looked back at him once, those intelligent eyes full of something he couldn't quite name. Trust, maybe. Or hope. He finally made it to work 3 hours late, and spent his shift thinking about Eleanor Vasquez unconscious on her bathroom floor, about Maggie sitting at that corner, waiting for someone to understand, about how close this had come to ending differently. During his lunch break, he called Northwestern Memorial, identified himself as the paramedic who'd found Eleanor, and asked about her condition. The nurse was hesitant to share information, but Marcus explained the situation, explained about Maggie. She's in the ICU, the nurse finally said. Massive heart attack. She was down for a while before you found her. They're not sure yet about brain damage, but she's alive, if you'd found her even 10 minutes later. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. That evening after his shift, Marcus didn't go home. He took the Blue Line to Animal Care and Control on Western Avenue, walked into the shelter, and asked to see Maggie. They led him back to the kennels, past rows of dogs barking and jumping and pressing against chain-link gates. Maggie was in Kennel 37, lying down with her head on her paws, not barking, not moving. But when she saw Marcus, her tail began to wag. I just wanted to check on you, Marcus said, crouching down. Make sure you're okay. Maggie stood up, came to the gate, pressed her nose through the links. Marcus reached through and scratched behind her ears. A shelter worker, a young man with multiple piercings and a name tag that read Dylan, came up beside him. You're the paramedic who brought her in? Marcus nodded. Keisha told us the story. Pretty incredible. Border collies are smart, but what she did... Dylan shook his head. That's next level. Has anyone called about her? Mrs. Vasquez's family? Not yet. We tried the emergency contacts on her paperwork, but no luck so far. Daughter's overseas with the State Department. Son's deployed, Afghanistan. Neighbors said she's got a sister in Wisconsin, but we haven't tracked her down yet. Marcus looked at Maggie, at her worried eyes. How long can she stay here? Standard hold is 4 days for owner surrender or stray, but given the circumstances, we can extend it. Problem is, the longer she's here. Dylan gestured around at the crowded kennels. Space is tight, and a purebred border collie, she'll get adopted fast. If family doesn't claim her, she'll go into the adoption pool. What if I fostered her? The words were out of Marcus's mouth before he'd fully thought them through. Just until Mrs. Vasquez recovers, or until family shows up. Dylan raised his eyebrows. You have experience with dogs? I had a German Shepherd growing up, and I worked 12-hour shifts, but I've got a decent apartment, a schedule. I can make it work. Dylan looked at Maggie, then back at Marcus. Let me talk to my supervisor. 20 minutes and a stack of paperwork later, Marcus walked out of the shelter with Maggie on a leash beside him, a bag of donated food and supplies in his other hand, and absolutely no idea what he'd just committed himself to. His apartment in Lincoln Square was small but comfortable, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a brick building with good light and hardwood floors. Maggie explored it cautiously, sniffing every corner, every piece of furniture. Marcus set up a water bowl, filled a plate with food, watched as Maggie ate with mechanical efficiency, like fueling was a necessary task rather than a pleasure. It's going to be okay, Marcus told her, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Eleanor's going to be fine. You'll see. But Maggie didn't look convinced. After she ate, she went to the door and sat, facing it, waiting. Marcus recognized that posture. He'd seen it that morning at the corner of North Avenue and Sedgwick. She was waiting for Eleanor, waiting for her person to come home. Marcus tried to coax her away from the door with toys, treats, gentle words. Maggie wouldn't move. She sat there until nearly midnight, when exhaustion finally overcame vigilance, and she lay down, her head still pointed toward the door, her eyes finally closing. Marcus watched her sleep from the couch, thinking about loyalty, about love, about the bond between a woman and her dog that was strong enough to send that dog searching through a city for help. He thought about Eleanor Vasquez lying in the ICU, tubes and wires keeping her alive, and he wondered if she knew what Maggie had done. If somewhere in her damaged brain, in whatever consciousness remained, she knew that her dog had saved her life. His phone buzzed. A text from Jen. Heard about you fostering that dog. You're a good guy, Hayes. Keep us updated. Marcus smiled, typed back a response, then went to get ready for bed. But before he did, he walked over to where Maggie was sleeping and sat down beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't want to wake her. He just sat there keeping watch, the way she'd been keeping watch for Eleanor. "We're going to figure this out," he whispered. "I promise." Outside, Chicago went about its business. Cars passed on the street below. The L train rattled by 6 blocks over. The city breathed in and out, indifferent to individual stories of loss and hope. But in that small apartment, in the quiet dark, Marcus Hayes made a promise to a sleeping dog, and he meant every word. The first week with Maggie was harder than Marcus expected. Not because she was difficult. Border Collies were known for being intense, hyperactive, demanding constant stimulation, but because she was too easy, too quiet. She ate when food was offered, went outside when the leash appeared, returned to her post by the door every single time. Marcus called Northwestern Memorial every morning before his shift and every evening after. Eleanor's condition remained critical but stable. The massive heart attack had caused significant damage. She'd regained consciousness briefly on day 3, but the doctors weren't optimistic about full recovery. The words "diminished capacity" and "long-term care facility" came up in conversations that made Marcus's chest tight. He'd never met Eleanor Vasquez before that morning. He'd found her unconscious. She was a stranger. But somehow, sitting in his apartment with her dog, that didn't seem to matter. On his days off, Marcus took Maggie to the hospital. Service dogs were allowed in certain areas, and Marcus bent the truth slightly, suggesting Maggie was in training. The nurses on Eleanor's floor must have heard the story because they didn't question it. They let Marcus bring Maggie to the ICU waiting room, where she sat perfectly still, watching the doors that led to where Eleanor lay sleeping. "She knows, doesn't she?" a nurse named Patricia said, watching Maggie. "She knows her person's in there." Marcus nodded. Border Collies are smart. They read situations better than most people. "My sister has one," Patricia said. "Smartest dog she's ever owned. Also the most neurotic." She looked at Maggie, who hadn't moved, whose eyes stayed fixed on those ICU doors. "But this one seems different. Calm, focused." "She's waiting," Marcus said quietly. 10 days after the heart attack, Eleanor's daughter arrived from Jakarta. Her name was Claire, 41, with her mother's dark eyes and the exhausted look of someone who'd just traveled halfway around the world. Marcus met her in the ICU waiting room, Maggie beside him. Claire's face crumpled when she saw the dog. "Oh God, Maggie!" She dropped to her knees, and Maggie, who'd barely moved for 10 days, rushed to her, tail wagging, pressing against her, whining softly. "I'm Marcus Hayes," Marcus said. "I'm the one who found your mother." Claire looked up, tears streaming down her face. "The paramedic, the one Maggie brought." She stood, still holding Maggie, and extended her hand. "Thank you. Jesus, thank you." "They told me if you'd been even a few minutes later." They sat in the waiting room while Claire visited her mother, Maggie curled at Marcus's feet now, calmer than she'd been in days. When Claire returned, her face was pale. "She's awake, but she's not really there, you know?" Claire sat down heavily. "The doctors say the lack of oxygen caused brain damage. They're talking about rehabilitation, about care facilities, about—" She stopped, pressed her hands against her face. "I don't know what to do. I'm stationed overseas. My brother's deployed. My aunt in Wisconsin is 78 with her own health problems. Mom lived alone because she wanted her independence. She said she was fine, that she had Maggie, that Chicago was her home. And now—" Marcus waited. Sometimes the best thing a paramedic could do was just be present while people processed the worst moments of their lives. "I can't take Maggie to Indonesia," Claire finally said. "My apartment doesn't allow pets. And even if it did, I work 14-hour days. It wouldn't be fair to her." "What about your brother?" Military housing, same problem. Claire looked down at Maggie, stroked her head. Mom loved this dog so much. Maggie was her whole world after Dad died. She used to send me videos of Maggie doing tricks, learning new commands. Border collies need jobs, she'd say. So she gave Maggie jobs. Fetch the paper, bring the leash, check the mail. Claire's voice broke. Find help when I'm dying on the bathroom floor. The silence stretched between them, heavy with impossible decisions. I'm fostering her, Marcus said. For now. Until you figure things out. Claire looked at him with such profound gratitude it was almost painful. I can pay you. For food. For... Don't worry about that. Just focus on your mom. Over the next few weeks, Marcus fell into a routine with Maggie. Morning walks before his shift. Evening walks after. On his days off, they explored Chicago together. Lincoln Park, the lakefront, even the dog beach near Montrose Harbor despite the bitter cold. Maggie moved through the world with careful attention, watching everything, processing everything. Other dogs barely interested her. People got a polite tail wag, but nothing more. She was waiting, Marcus realized. Still waiting for Eleanor. At work, his colleagues teased him about becoming a dog person. Rodriguez brought in homemade treats his wife had made. Jen sent him links to dog training videos. His supervisor, Captain Williams, just shook his head and smiled. You've got attachment issues, Hayes, Williams said one day in the firehouse kitchen. It's temporary, Marcus replied, but even he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. The truth was, having Maggie had changed something in his apartment, in his life. He'd lived alone since his divorce 7 years ago, had dated occasionally but never seriously, had built a life around his work and his small circle of friends and not much else. The apartment had been quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. The kind of quiet that sometimes felt too big, too empty. With Maggie there, it felt like a home. He started noticing things he hadn't paid attention to in years. The way morning light came through the kitchen window. The rhythm of the neighborhood. The couple upstairs who fought every Thursday. The man downstairs who played classical piano at odd hours. He started cooking real meals instead of eating takeout, because it seemed wrong to feed himself garbage while Maggie ate carefully measured portions of quality dog food. One evening in late February, Marcus came home from a brutal shift. 3 calls, 2 MVAs, and 1 shooting, all within 6 hours, and found himself sitting on the floor of his living room with Maggie's head in his lap, crying for the first time in years. He cried for the 19-year-old kid who died in the back of his ambulance. He cried for Eleanor Vasquez, who was being transferred to a long-term care facility because her brain couldn't relearn how to make her body work. He cried for all the people he'd tried to save and couldn't, for all the losses that accumulated like snow until you could barely move through them. Maggie didn't move away. She pressed closer, her warm weight solid and real. And somehow, that helped. Eleanor was transferred to Sunrise Rehabilitation Center in Skokie on March 1st. Claire flew back to Jakarta, promising to return in 3 months. Her brother, stationed in Kandahar, sent messages through Claire but couldn't get leave. The aunt in Wisconsin had fallen and broken her hip. There was no one to take Maggie. Keep fostering her, Claire said over video chat. Please, I'll figure something out. I'll find someone. I just need time. Marcus agreed, even though he knew, somewhere deep down, in a place he wasn't quite ready to examine, that time wasn't going to solve this problem, because the problem wasn't logistics or housing or work schedules. The problem was that Maggie didn't want someone. She wanted Eleanor. He started taking Maggie to visit Eleanor at Sunrise twice a week. The staff was initially hesitant, but when they saw how Eleanor's eyes would track Maggie across the room, how her right hand would twitch like she was trying to reach for her dog, they made an exception. Eleanor couldn't speak anymore. The stroke damage had stolen that. She could make sounds, small noises of distress or contentment, but no words. She could move her right side slightly, though her left remained largely paralyzed. She knew things, the doctor said. She was in there, but locked inside a body that no longer obeyed her. During their visits, Marcus would lift Maggie onto Eleanor's bed, and Maggie would curl up beside her former owner with such gentle care it made Marcus's throat tight. Eleanor would touch Maggie's head with her working hand, tears sliding down her face, and Maggie would press closer, as still as stone, as if she understood that stillness was what Eleanor needed. "She knows," one of the nurses told Marcus after a visit in mid-March. Her name was Kim, a woman in her 50s with short grey hair, and the patient, knowing eyes of someone who'd worked in long-term care for decades. "Dogs know more than we give them credit for. They know when someone's sick, when someone's dying, when someone needs them." "Is Eleanor dying?" Marcus asked. Kim looked at him with gentle honesty. "We're all dying, honey. Some of us just faster than others. Eleanor's body is failing. Her mind's trapped in there watching it happen. That's its own kind of hell." She watched Maggie, still curled on the bed. "But that dog gives her something to hold on to. You can see it. When Maggie's here, Eleanor fights harder." That night, Marcus sat in his apartment with Maggie beside him on the couch and made a decision he'd been avoiding for weeks. He pulled out his laptop and started researching border collies, their needs, their intelligence, their capacity for work and loyalty. He read about their history as herding dogs, bred for centuries to think independently, to solve problems, to form intense bonds with their handlers. He read about dogs like Maggie who'd saved lives, who'd alerted families to fires or carbon monoxide leaks or medical emergencies. About their almost supernatural ability to read human behavior, to sense seizures before they happened, to know when something was wrong. And he realized that what Maggie had done, leading him to Eleanor, wasn't luck or coincidence or accident. It was training. Eleanor had trained Maggie to find help. Maybe not consciously, maybe not with that specific scenario in mind, but border collies learned by watching, by understanding patterns. Maggie had learned that when Eleanor was in distress, you got help. You found someone. You brought them back. She'd done exactly what she'd been taught to do. She'd saved her person's life. Marcus looked at Maggie, who was watching him with those intense, intelligent eyes. "You're not just a dog, are you? You're her partner, her family." Maggie's tail wagged once. The next day, Marcus requested a meeting with Eleanor's care team at sunrise. The doctor, a neurologist named Dr. Patel, reviewed Eleanor's charts while Marcus waited. "Her prognosis hasn't changed," Dr. Patel said gently. "The damage is extensive. We don't expect significant recovery." "How long does she have?" "That's impossible to say. Could be months. Could be years. Her heart is weak. Her body is declining. But some patients in her condition live for a long time." Marcus nodded slowly. "And what's her quality of life?" Dr. Patel was quiet for a moment. "She's aware. She can't communicate effectively, can't care for herself, can't do any of the things that made her life meaningful. But she's not in pain, not suffering in the acute sense. She exists. Whether that constitutes quality of life?" He shrugged. "That's a philosophical question, not a medical one." "What about the dog?" Marcus asked. "Does having Maggie visit improve her condition?" "Her vitals are more stable when the dog is present. Her stress markers decrease. She's more engaged, more responsive. So yes, medically speaking, the visits are beneficial." Marcus took a breath. What if Maggie stayed? Not just visits. What if she was here full-time? Dr. Patel leaned back in his chair, as in a facility dog. As in Eleanor's dog, living here, with her. "Mr. Hayes, we're not equipped for that. We have policies about animals, liability concerns, staff who might be allergic." "Border collies are hypoallergenic," Marcus interrupted. And Maggie's been trained. She's calm, obedient, perfectly behaved. She doesn't bark, doesn't cause problems. All she does is sit with Eleanor. I understand the appeal, but Dr. Patel, Eleanor's daughter is overseas. Her son's deployed. Her family can't take the dog. The alternatives are giving Maggie to strangers or... Marcus stopped, not wanting to say the word euthanasia, though it hung in the air between them. Eleanor trained this dog, loved this dog. That dog saved her life. If the visits help her, if having Maggie here improves her quality of life, then isn't that worth considering? Dr. Patel looked at him for a long moment. You care about this patient, but you're not family. You're a stranger who happened to find her. I'm a paramedic, Marcus said. I'm trained to save lives, but I'm learning that saving a life isn't just about keeping the body breathing. It's about preserving what makes that life worth living. For Eleanor, that's Maggie. Let me talk to the facility director, Dr. Patel said finally. I'm not making any promises. Marcus left the meeting feeling like he'd just run a marathon. He sat in his car in the Sunrise parking lot, Maggie in the passenger seat beside him, and wondered when exactly this had stopped being about fostering a dog temporarily and started being about something much bigger. His phone rang. Claire, calling from Jakarta. I found someone, she said, her voice bright with relief. A family in Michigan. Friends of friends. They have a farm, lots of space. They've had border collies before. They're willing to take Maggie. Marcus's stomach dropped. When? They can pick her up next week. I know it's fast, but honestly, Marcus, this is perfect. Maggie will have room to run, things to do. She'll be happy. Marcus looked at Maggie, who was looking toward Sunrise's entrance, toward where Eleanor lay in her bed on the 3rd floor. Claire, he said slowly, before you commit to this, there's something we need to talk about.